table, or fondue bourguignon, or Swiss cheese fondue, and all those things that are cooked right there. Now, as you are, of course, a tyro, a beginner in the art of cooking, you will find that you depend on the recipe book, on instructions as to how to go about it. And that's quite right and proper, because recipes have been worked out and tested over many hundreds of years and are things to learn from. But the more you begin to understand and get a feel for cooking, the less you will need recipes. And you will find yourself in the delightful situation of being able to invent all sorts of different meals, where you're not following recipes, but you're creating your own. Especially is this true in the art of dealing with leftovers. This is a real test of mastery in cooking. A good cook should not waste anything. Should find out how to convert all things that are left over from the kitchen into something exciting. And that's, you see, a real test of your inventive genius. And eventually you come to know in your bones, in your nerve centers in the nose, what goes with what, how to treat certain things. And it becomes, therefore, increasingly difficult for you to explain to anyone else how it's done. The Chinese Taoist book written by Zhuangzi has a number of examples in it of the yoga of everyday life. And two of the ones he mentions in particular are the art of the wheelwright and the art of the butcher. The wheelwright is an old gentleman, 70 years old, who makes wheels with absolute perfection that do not wobble on the axle and do not grip on the axle, but revolve quite evenly. But because he doesn't know how he does it, he cannot explain to his son how to do it as well as he can. Therefore, still is working, although 70 years old. Then there is the butcher, who uses his knife so skillfully that it hasn't had to be sharpened in 17 years, because it always goes exactly through the joints in the bone. And that which is infinitely thin can enter where there is no space. This is Zhuangzi's fanciful way of putting it. But that knife that goes whoosh, you see, and never has to go crack, is always in sharp form. So in this way, he says there is something incommunicable about all great arts. He says also, following his mentor Lao Tzu, the 5 colors make the eyes blind. The 5 tones make the ears deaf. That means, if you think there are only 5 colors, you're blind. If you think there are only 5 tones, you're deaf. In other words, let's say we have a spectrum, 7 colors. The Chinese think of 5. We think of so many 12 tones in the musical scale. But if you think there are only 12 tones, you're deaf. And so in taste, in all the arts of cooking, if you depend on the recipe, you have no tongue. You could say then in Taoist fashion, recipes spoil the tongue. That's an exaggerated way of saying something. It's a half-truth. It's a truth that is imperfect, but it's said that way, in that violent way, as it were, to attract attention. Recipes are very useful, but you will eventually come to the point where you will not be able to explain, and therefore you get those awkward recipes where it says simply, season to taste, a pinch of this, a dollop of that, and you don't know how big a pinch or a dollop is. Well, that's because you haven't yet developed the feel for the way in which certain ingredients will go with others. But But you will find, as you cook in that attitude, that you will become deeply aware of the miracle of the transformation of the world into humanity through your careful ministrations. Therefore will become more aware of your ecological going with all other forms of life, and therefore be more fundamentally enlightened. Well, now, last night I was being specific about one of the yogas of everyday life and applying it to the art of cooking. And as a concluding session, I want to discuss the way in which the consciousness of your essential oneness with this whole universe and what we call everyday consciousness go together. If you read a great deal about mysticism, you will find descriptions of ecstasies developed through the practice of yoga, meditation, or whatever, that seem to be so completely absorbing, enthralling, ecstatic, and rapturous that you cannot conceive that anybody could be in that state of consciousness and at the same time carry on everyday life. And we hear of great Hindu mystics like Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Ramana Maharshi, who spend hours and hours in samadhi. They sit there with their eyes closed in sheer rapture, out of this world altogether. And if that is the ideal state to which man should attain, that kind of contemplation, obviously, it is inconsistent with everyday life. But there is a strong tradition, not only in India, but also in the Far East, that there is a higher state than samadhi, than rapture. And this much higher state is called in India sahaja, S-A-H-A-J-A, and that means the natural state. The state in which illumination is quite natural and fits in precisely with everything in the way of ordinary consciousness. This is very much a strong feature also of the Zen Buddhist tradition, where they have the saying, your ordinary mind is Buddha, or is the Tao, the way. And in Zen, the poet Hokoji has said, supernatural power and marvelous activity. I draw water, I gather fuel. So that for Zen, there is no distinction whatsoever between what we would call the normal consciousness of the everyday world through our five senses and the supreme state of consciousness of total awakening and enlightenment. Indeed, going back to the fundamental logic of the Upanishads, the great texts upon which all Indian wisdom is based, they insist again and again that the supreme state is without duality. And without duality means without exclusiveness. They would say, for example, that to experience the highest state of consciousness is not merely to experience the oneness of things. You would think, you see, if you experienced all things as one, that somehow the differentiations which you perceive in the world outside you would disappear, and that you would experience all around you in every direction a uniform luminosity in which all differentiation was dissolved. And I can assure you that would be an extremely boring state of mind to get stuck in indefinitely. That's not what to expect. Because the non-dual means the non-exclusive, that which does not have any opposite. And if the ultimate reality behind this universe.